Good afternoon and welcome to today's HydroCAD webinar. My name is Peter Smart. I will be the presenter this afternoon, and we're going to be talking today about reporting in HydroCAD, both reporting, printing reports, data export, and a range of related topics. This may not at first glance appear to be the most exciting topic for HydroCAD, but there's a lot of good stuff here that you'll find very valuable and that will certainly save you time and enhance the reports that you can get out of HydroCAD. What I want to start with is just looking at the main HydroCAD screen, and as I'm sure you know, when you open a project in HydroCAD, you can go to any one of the nodes on that screen and you can simply double click a node in order to open a report window for that particular node. You can also get there by right-clicking a node, and on the context menu that appears you'll see an item for node report, and that selection is exactly the same as double-clicking the node. They will both bring up that report window. You can have any number of report windows open at a given time as you want to. So if we want to look at that reach plus a pond, now we have two different report windows open. So you can manage the windows in any way you choose. You may often want to position them so you can look at two windows at once. So as you're making changes to parts of the model, you can see those effects. So if we were to edit a subcatchment area somewhere upstream and change that area, when we click OK, it ripples through the model and it updates those report windows that we have open. So those will always show the current results. If we want to minimize those windows in order to look at other things, you'll notice that they are still available down on the bottom of your screen. You can restore them. The windows will also come back automatically when you single click a node. So if I click this pond and I have a report window open, then that window gets restored. Windows are also automatically minimized and restored as you move between projects. So if we open a second HydroCAD project, then when we open that, the report windows are automatically minimized. When we reselect the original project, those windows come back. So there's a lot of automatic window management there. One of the key tricks when you're working with report windows is, in general, not to maximize your main HydroCAD screen. If you do maximize the main HydroCAD screen like that, then you can't see the edges of those windows in order to bring them back. The windows will come back automatically when you switch projects, but if you go back to your diagram, they're hidden once again. You can use View Restore Reports, and that will bring the screens back. That's another way to get there. But in general, what I recommend is that you run your main screen as a partial window so you can see at least the edges of those reports and keep track of what's going on. If you're running a dual monitor setup, that's a great way to actually move those reports over to a second monitor and keep them there. And then you have more space available to see the reports as well as the primary routing diagram. So that's a very handy thing to do. So that was just a few notes on multiple report windows. What I want to do now is look at a single report window, in this case a pond report, and we'll talk about a number of capabilities and features of these windows. The default window that comes up is normally the hydrograph, the inflow-outflow hydrograph for that particular node. There are additional tabs up the top for displaying different report windows. The summary, which is the overall synopsis of what's going on with that node. Then there is also for a stage discharge report for a pond, which shows discharge versus elevation. The stage storage report showing storage versus elevation. And then we have additional tabs which are node dependent, which may show our different rainfall events. And in this case of a pond, we've also got a sizing report. What we mostly want to look at today are the specific features related to how we view those reports and how we print them or export them. So coming back to the Hydrograph, which is our default window, the initial or default report. The initial view here is a three-dimensional representation. We can use the buttons over on the right-hand side to switch to a 2D view. And this can be useful to give you a closer image, for example, of where these two curves are overlapping, where they coincide. To get a closer view of any part of this, we can zoom in. To zoom in, you drag from an upper left point to a lower right-hand point within the graph, and that will expand that part of the curve. And we can repeat that zoom in multiple times. To zoom out again, we just drag in the reverse direction by any amount from lower right to upper left, and it brings us back to the original view. So those are just a few things you can use in order to move around in the image. You can zoom on a 3D representation, but it can be a little bit confusing to do that. So often I suggest that you go to the 2D view and zoom in there, and then you can switch that back to a 3D view if you want to. But it's much easier to do the zoom while you're looking at a 2D view. The next representation of these graphs, which is useful, is that there is a tabular view available for most graphs, and you can get there by pressing the table button over on the right-hand side. That will switch you to the table view. You can also do that by clicking the tab that you have selected. So if I click the Hydrograph tab, which is already selected, then it will toggle back and forth between the graphical and the tabular view. So it's just a quick way to get back and forth between those two. Now, in either the graphical or the tabular view, there are default curves that are displayed, or in the tabular view, we have default columns. There are often additional columns that are available to you, and you can select those by right-clicking any tabular report, and then hover over Report Items, and select, and then you'll see a list of all of the different items that can be included in this particular table. Usually the items of greatest interest will be automatically selected, so you won't have to pick those up manually. But there are additional items. For example, you'll notice there's an option here to show inflows, and if we select that, then this table, in addition to showing us the total inflow, which is this column of information here, it's also giving us a breakdown. So here it's showing each of the 3 inflows that make up that total. And you can use this to verify your inflow calculations if you need to. For example, that inflow of 4.16 CFS will be the sum of those 3 values next to it. This is often a useful report because we get a lot of questions when people ask, why don't my peak flows add up? Well, your inflow peaks will only add directly if they all occur at exactly the same point in time. And it's very common for the peaks to actually occur at slightly different times, which means the sum of the peaks will not be reflected by the peak inflow in that pond. However, if you add the flows at any one moment in time, those will always add up to the flow coming into the pond. So that's one of the things you can use this report for. But that is an optional item that you need to select, going over to Report, Select, and Inflows. And you can select and deselect that item as you choose. Coming back to the graphical hydrograph, let's do the same operation. If we right-click and select Report Items, here we see the curves that are displayed on the hydrograph. And there's an additional option, which is the elevation curve. If we select that one, we now have this additional gray or black curve, which is showing elevation versus time in the pond. I find personally this is a very interesting graph, often more useful than simply the inflow-outflow curves. And switch to a 2D view here for a moment, and the black curve behind is showing the elevation increasing in the pond and then reaching a maximum and then gradually decreasing as we drain the pond. Now, if you want to see that elevation curve all of the time, if you say, hey, that's really useful to me, then after selecting the elevation curve, which we've done, we can go to Save as Pond Defaults. And now, every time we open a pond report window, that curve will be included. So let's close our pond window and then double-click the pond again. And now the report window is open, but you can see that the elevation curve is automatically included. So we can do that for any of these nodes in order to select additional optional items. For subcatchments, if we right-click and go to Report Items and select, runoff is the only option that's available there to us. There aren't any other choices. But if we go to the tabular view, you can see there are several different columns. These are automatically selected. There's also another useful column which was added based on user requests, which shows the total runoff volume versus time. So if we select that, this is the cumulative volume to any point in time. And you'll notice this number is monotonically increasing as we go through the storm. So this shows that there's a total of 2.67 acre-feet of runoff, but it shows us exactly how that accumulates time-wise. So that's another of the options available to us for selecting report items. And once again, if we wanted to see that item all the time or most of the time, we could save as subcatchment defaults. Now, if we have set a default and it turns out we don't want it, then we would just come back and do reset subcatchment defaults. So again, you'll find these items on the right-click menu for most any report, be it a graphical or a tabular report. Another thing that's useful on the right-click menu, if you find you're having to resize a window, and usually you do want to increase the size of these windows so you can see your entire summary report, for example, then we can right-click and go to Window Size and select Save Current Size. And we can save the size for just subcatchments, or we can save it for all of our reports. So let's do a Save Current Size for all reports. And now I'll close the window and let's go back to our pond and reopen. And now the report window comes back with that larger window size. So now if we go to our summary, we have enough width that we can see the entire report without having to expand or scroll horizontally. So that's another handy feature for changing the report window size and being able to save that. Now, another item pertaining to the report screen, when we double-click any of the nodes to open a report window, initially it displays the Hydrograph tab. There are a couple of options pertaining to that. If we come back to, let's see, Settings, General, then we have a number of options here that pertain to the report windows. Down here on the right-hand side, we can choose whether or not the initial tab will be the graph, the hydrograph plot, or the summary. So if you would prefer to see that summary report automatically come up as the default each time you open a report window, this is where you'd make that selection. There are also a number of options here that control the hydrograph plot, also the stage discharge and stage storage curves. We can control things such as the line width, which is used when we're displaying a two-dimensional plot. By default, it's 2 pixels thick. You can go down to 1 pixel if you want a really fine line, or you can go wider if you want something more visible. You've also got options here as to how things are labeled and how they will be displayed. For example, you can select here whether you want 3D graphs as your default, or if you prefer the 2D view, then you can deselect that option. There is also an option here to list the peaks on the side of the hydrograph, as opposed to labeling the peaks on the top. So you can choose one or both or neither of those options as you prefer. There is also an option to display the time at which the peak occurs, as opposed to, in addition to, displaying the peak flow. So those are all available to you. And then finally, the note width. This determines the size of the text that will appear in that report, normally on the right-hand side of the hydrograph. And this sets the nominal width of that text. The default is that it's 45% of the width of the report, but you can increase or decrease that width if you want to change the amount of space that's used for displaying those text items on the right-hand side. So a bunch of items are available to you there. We're again on the Settings General screen, and these control aspects of the report window and exactly how it will appear. The next thing I want to talk about here is basic printing capabilities. You have on the right-hand side of each of these report windows a print button. And if we click that print button, you don't see anything initially on the screen. What happens is that HydroCAD immediately prints this specific report that we're looking at using your default Windows printer. So there's no prompting. This is designed just quickly doing a single page print of just the screen that you're looking at. If we're on a 2D view, it'll print the 2D view. If we're on the tabular view, it'll print the table. So whatever you're looking at, it will print that, looking essentially just like the screen. Now, if we wanted to change the printer that was being used, then we would go to our main menu and go to Printer Settings. On this screen, you'll see your normal default printer, but you can also change the printer, so you could choose any of the other printers that you have installed on your computer. You could also switch to a landscape view if you prefer that to a portrait view. Every time you launch HydroCAD, this screen will revert back to your default Windows printer, but you can change that if you want to do individual prints. Now, a little later on, we're going to talk about multi-page reports, and when you run multi-page reports, you will be prompted to change the printer for each report if you wish to do that. So you don't have to remember to change this setting in advance. You only have to make an advance setting here, or advance change, if as far as using the single page report option. The other screen that's of use related to printing reports, again on the print menu, if we come down to Print Page Settings. Print Page Settings is where we can control the company name, and so this is always something that you'll want to enter. This appears on the page heading for every single page you print. That heading includes the project name, the date, the time, and your company name. And this is where you can select those individual items that will appear on the report. So by default, today's date is always included in the heading, and there's a page number which is also included. You have the option to include the current time if you want to do that. You can include the complete path to where your project is stored in addition to just the project name. And there's an option to print reports in color. So if you have a color printer, by default they will be printed in color. You can deselect this if you do not want them to appear in color, and that will allow you to print a black and white output on a color printer. There are also boxes here that let you set the margins for your reports, so you can adjust those margins on all four sides of the page. And then finally, there's a box here that we can use to set the font that will be used for the report. And the default here is set to Arial, regular, and a point size. I have the point size set to 12, which I think is a little bit higher than the default. 9, 10, 11, and 12 are generally nice aesthetically looking sizes. You can adjust those and see how your various reports work. If you go too large, you'll find you don't fit as much report on the page as you'd like. If you go too small, then you basically have blank space on the page and the report is not as visible. So you can adjust those in order to get the exact behavior that you're looking for. So those are a couple of menu items that pertain to printed reports, and in particular to this print button over on the right-hand side of the report window. Now, the next button down below print is the export button. The export button is used to export whichever tab we're looking at to various different file formats. So if we come back to a hydrograph view for start and click the export button, what we want to do is open the box here for Save As type. And this shows you the different options that are available for file formats in which we can save or export this particular image. Let's start by picking a JPEG file, partly because it's very widely known, and then you can decide which folder you want to save these images in. I've got an example folder that I'm going to drop these into for this session. And then a default file name is given for you. You can use that name or change it. I'm just going to use the name, the default that's preset. So I'm just going to click the Save button, and it goes ahead and it silently saves that file. Now, if I open up the folder that I had selected to save those to, here's that folder, and we've created this file, Mountain View Housing Complex, Pond 1, P hydrograph.jpg. So that's the JPEG file that we've just created. And if I click or double click that file in Windows, it will open up the picture viewer in Windows and you get a view of that individual file. So there's the JPEG file that we have just exported to. Let me close the viewer, and let's come back to our report window and click Export once again. And I want to look at some of the other export file types that are available here. A JPEG file is most commonly used for photographs because it is able to achieve a high level of compression with images such as photographs that don't have clean line work. If you have clean line work, which is what we have on most of these HydroCAD reports, whether they be text or graphs, then there are some other formats that may be more useful. The Windows meta file or enhanced meta file, more commonly, these are very similar formats as the names would suggest. But the EMF format, let's do a sample of that and do a save to the same folder. And if we come back and look at the folder, we now have another file that's been created, an EMF file. And let's click that in order to open it in the picture viewer. The Windows meta file and EMF file give you sharp, crisp line work. That's one of their advantages over a JPEG. A JPEG is an actual dot or pixel image of that screen, and so when you rescale it, you will get artifacts. Whereas with an EMF file, it's able to store actual line work. So if I maximize this screen and zoom in, you can see that this stays razor sharp as we zoom in. Like your CAD drawings, these are actual line representations. So as long as you've got software that will handle an EMF file, this is often going to be a better format, a better choice for you for exporting these images. One more file format that's available, let's just go down the list, would be a BMP file, and this is a raw bitmap file. This is very similar to a JPEG, but it's not compressed at all. So here's the bitmap file, and you'll notice the size of the bitmap file is about 1,000 kilobytes. It's a megabyte as opposed to about 136K for both the compressed JPEG and the EMF. So the bitmap file is about 7 or 8 times larger. That's pretty typical. If we open the bitmap file, it's nice and sharp here because there's no compression artifacts. But as we zoom in, we are looking at a bitmap rather than as line work. And so you can see that it's really most suitable for use in its original dimensions. As we rescale it, we'll start to see some less desirable aspects. So that's why you may want to use the EMF file in order to avoid that. But those file formats are available to you. There's a bunch of different options. Now, if we were looking at a tabular view, let's go there next, and we click the Export button. We now have a somewhat different list of file formats that are available to us. We still have an EMF format, and that allows us to export an exact image of this table. Let's go ahead and do that, and then we can open up that view. And this table is not just a text report, although it contains mostly text. It has graphical elements to it, such as the underline that appears up top. There are also bold characters showing the peak values in bold used in the heading. So it's actually a graphical report. And the EMF format retains all of those aspects of the graphical report. So that's why that may be a preferred choice for exporting this. If we were to export instead to a text file, which would be another option here, and then let's open up our text file. The text file is able to retain most of that formatting, but it can't do the bold on the headings, and it has to mimic the underline behavior by using dashes. So the text file is available for some of these reports that can be translated in an acceptable manner from their original graphical representation to text. And then let's export one more time and look at the last option here, which is a comma-separated file, a CSV file. And CSV file is very, very handy for transferring data into a spreadsheet or a database. Let's go ahead and save this, do the export, and we now have a CSV file. Now, if you have Microsoft Excel or some other spreadsheet installed on your computer, then that program is likely to be the default program that will be used when you open a CSV file. You can also right-click a CSV file, or any other file for that matter, and you can go down and specify the particular program that you want to use to open the file. So we could specify that we want to open that in Notepad, and now we're getting a raw view of what's inside that file. So just to show you what a CSV file means, it means we have values here that are separated by commas. It's that simple. So in each line, we've got a bunch of comma-separated values. And then at the top of the file, we have a line which has got the headings. So essentially, this is our table, but in a slightly different format. And if we simply open that file, then if you've got Microsoft Excel installed, as I do here, you can do this with Quattro Pro or OpenOffice or other spreadsheets, then that will open looking like a spreadsheet. So it's parsed the file based on the commas and brought them into a spreadsheet. So now we can manipulate them, add columns, other calculations, whatever changes we need, and we could then save that as a standard spreadsheet file that would preserve all of those changes. One of the tricks when you bring these CSV files in, this first line, which has got the headings, if I click on any one of these cells, you'll notice up here that there's actually two lines of information. There's the elevation and then there's the units. In order to display that constantly, what you want to do is come over to the left column here and find the separator between the first and second line and drag that down, and it will expand the vertical space for that first column, so that now we can see the parameter as well as the units that are displayed. Over here you can see the word secondaries being word wrapped, so we would want to come over here and expand that header a little bit. So now the headings appear as they were originally intended. The particular parameter on the first line and then the actual units that are being used after that. So if we'd switched our project to metric or customized the units in any way, that would be reflected on this table as well. So that is a CSV file, and where it's used, it's very handy for exporting information. If you want to process this further or perhaps embed this in some other report, then this is a very handy way to go. Now I'm going to close that but not save it. And I want to look at one more button here, which is available to you when you're viewing tables, and that's the shrink button. When you view a table by default, the shrink button is selected, and the purpose of the shrink button is to essentially condense this table so that rather than getting hundreds or thousands of lines, it shows you just enough lines that will fill one screen or one page of paper. So it makes it quicker to scroll through the overall table. I mentioned earlier that the maximum values in this table are displayed in bold, and in this case you'll notice we've actually got two values that are shown in bold. And what that's telling us is that the maximum, the highest value, actually falls in between those values. But because we're using the shrink option, that highest value is actually in between. So if I click the shrink button to turn off the shrink, and now you've noticed our time step on the table has shifted down to a smaller value of 1/10 of an hour. And we've got a much longer table, as you can see by the relative size of the scroll bar here. And if we scroll down through the table, now you can see that our maximum values are shown with a single bold value. So by essentially zooming in on the table, the highest single value can be displayed. It's not hidden by the shrink function in between two other values. The shrink is normally on by default for a very important reason, and that is if we were to click the print button now, we would get a very large printout. We might get 5, 10, 20 pages needed to print that. And that's fine if you want to do it, but it's annoying if you accidentally print 20 pages. So that's why the shrink button is turned off by default. However, that could be very handy if we want to export this. A moment ago we exported the table with the shrink function on, and it exported just the values that were visible on the screen. If we export now with shrink turned off and do the export once more, and then go and open that file, and what it's done is it's overwritten, it's updated that one file that we created before. And now we have a much larger table. We've got 10th hour increments down through our table. So that's the effect of the shrink button. There are also some related settings to control the time step that's used for tables and hydrographs, and that's back in your Calculation Settings screen on the Reports tab. And by default, those steps will all be chosen automatically. But there are capabilities here that we can use a smaller time step for the hydrograph plots. We can also use a smaller time span. So this actually changes the span that will be reported. Normally you would set your calculation time span, and here we have 9 to 40 hours. That's where the calculations are done. On the Reporting tab, we can select a smaller span. So if we only want to look at 10 to 16 hours in our reports, we can specify that here. We can also constrain the tables in the same way to use that smaller window, essentially. And then we have options to alter the time step that will be used for hydrographs, and also the elevation step that will be used for the stage discharge and stage storage curves. Normally your defaults are going to be fine and you don't need to change these, but these settings are available to you so that you can tweak those increments and spans that are used on your reports. So just to be aware that those are available to you. If you find that these steps in conjunction with the shrink button are not giving you the options you want, then you can go back to those other options on the Calculation Settings screen. Okay. The next thing to show you briefly, I've exported a couple of files here, and I showed you opening one of the CSV files in a spreadsheet. You can also take those files and you can put them into MS Word. So what we could do is create a new Microsoft Word document. And I'll just open up that blank document, which we have over here. And now we could just take, for example, an EMF file that we had exported and drag that over and drop it into MS Word. And now you can see we have that exact table. Word is quite good at handling EMF files. You get an exact representation of the original image, and they're scalable and easy to work with. You can also drag other images, of course, into Word. You can bring a JPEG file over. Just come down the bottom here. And there we go. Let's put it on the next page. So there's our JPEG file. And we could also drag our EMF image in the same way, and you can see the additional sharpness we get with the EMF format graph. And of course you can click those and you can resize them. So that's a very nice way to embed individual graphs within a Microsoft Word report. So I'm just going to close out of Microsoft Word and not save that at the moment. The next group of options I want to look at pertains to printing and exporting from the routing diagram image. Up on the main menu, we have under Print, we've got a Print Report option, which is for multi-page reports, and we're going to get there in just a moment. And we also have buttons to print the routing diagram. And this sends the routing diagram to your current printer in either portrait or landscape. That's pretty straightforward. You can also export the routing diagram to a file in several different formats. We've already looked at these formats, so there's really nothing new here. You can just pick the best format and do a save, and it will export an image of the diagram for you. And then we have Print Diagram to Clipboard. And this just copies an image of the routing diagram straight out to the clipboard. And so if we went back into MS Word and do a right click and a paste, we should have an image of the routing diagram pasted in from the clipboard. So there's a number of ways you can move this information around. Now, those are diagram operations. And then the next thing I want to look at is, in fact, the Print Report screen. If we do Print Report, this allows us to generate an automatic multi-page report for the current project. you'll notice the little printer icon that sits next to this. We can get to the print report screen by using this very same icon on the toolbar. You'll notice we have an icon here for print diagram and for print report because those are amongst the more commonly used items from the menu. If we do print report, it opens this print report screen. The print report screen has got a lot of different settings on it that allow us to customize exactly the way our reports will appear. The first thing you'll notice in the upper left-hand corner is that we can select the rainfall events to be included in the report. The default is that this report will automatically include all of the events that are defined for this particular project. If we wanted to use only individual events, then we could just deselect the ones that we don't want to include. Or if we want to use only the current rainfall setting, then we just pick current rainfall. So this is fairly obvious, but it's quite powerful because if we've selected multiple rainfall events, the software will automatically go through and update the model for each of the events, and then everything on this page will be printed for each of those different storms. As you probably know, your rainfall events are defined back on your calculation settings screen on the Rainfall tab. You can enter individual rainfall depth information here, but you can also use the rainfall event box in order to define all of your different named events. And there are several ways to do that, and we covered that in a previous webinar on rainfall and runoff options. You need to define your events there in order for them to appear as an option on the print report screen. So if you go in here and you don't see any rainfall events, it means you haven't defined them yet for that particular project. The next couple of setting boxes here allow you to specify what nodes are to be included in this report. The default in this case is that all 15 nodes in the project will be included in the report. We also have an option that we could limit this report and include just an individual node that's been selected. If we move this window aside, you can see back on the diagram pond 1 is selected. So we could report just that one node, or we could do all 15 nodes. We also have an option to limit the report to one particular type of node. So perhaps we want to consider all 15 nodes but print only the subcatchments. So we could limit the report in that manner. So if we want to print perhaps a slightly different report for the subcatchments than for the ponds, then we could go in and do subcatchments first and then come back and do ponds after we've done that. So a number of different selection options. This option to report only the selected nodes, I should comment on that. Let's cancel this report screen for a moment. When you click on a node, that one node is normally selected. You can select multiple nodes by clicking and dragging a selection rectangle across those nodes. So we now have 3 nodes selected. You can also use a control click in order to select additional nodes or to deselect. So there are several different ways that you can select the nodes. If I have 3 nodes selected, when I go into the print report screen, you will notice I now have an option here to include the 3 selected nodes. So if it's just a specific subset of nodes you want, then you should pre-select those nodes before you come into the print report screen, and then you'll be able to limit your report just to those nodes. The next box here lets us control the way the reports will be sorted. Normally they are sorted by the node type and the node number. What that means is that your subcatchments will appear first in numerical order, then the reaches, then the ponds, then the links. The other option that's available to you is that you could sort just by node number. So if you have a scheme where you would prefer to intersperse the subcatchments with the ponds, perhaps you want to put things in flow sequence for the project, then what you would do is select this object to sort just by node number. But on your routing diagram, you would need to number the nodes so they appear in a flow sequence. When you do that, then you'll get the whole report in that flow sequence rather than grouped with subcatchments, reaches, ponds, and links, each listed separately. So that's what that report is intended to, or that option is intended to give you. The next box on this screen are the general reporting options. what we can choose here are the specific elements that will appear on the printed page. And these are basically all items that we've seen on the screen so far. When you double-click a node in order to open a report window, these elements are all available to you. The routing diagram is the first one, and this will print on a separate page if the diagram is selected. We also have an option to print project notes, including the private notes. Now, this is grayed out in this instance because we don't have any notes for this project. You'll find this up on the project menu. You can go to project notes and you can put these in, and then you'll have the option here for those to appear at the beginning of your report. So this is a capability that allows you to generate a more complete report, so you can include other commentary or narrative that you may want to automatically provide. It lets you put that text within the HydroCAD project file so that it can automatically appear in your reports to help the reviewer understand exactly what you've done in your analysis. The next line here controls a number of full-page listings. The area listing shows all of the ground covers and areas that are used in that project. There is also an option to show the soil groups and how they're distributed, and even the land use listings. Now, these reports are also available to you individually using the report icons up on the toolbar. You'll find these under the print menu, but also this project report button will allow you to open a window where you can pick tabs for these individual reports. This screen allows you to automatically include those in a multi-page report. We also have reports available that list all of the pipes in the project, a report listing the notes that you've entered for each individual node, which again is used to make your analysis more understandable to a reviewer. And then we have the node listing. The node listing is a concise listing of all of the nodes in the particular project. And it's just 2 or 3 lines for each node, just giving you the essential information as concisely as possible. And then the totals option simply indicates that each of these reports will have a total shown at the bottom, such as the total area or total length of the flow segments. Then the next choices here pertain to the individual nodes. The summary is that first tab on any individual node report, and that contains the complete information about that particular subcatchment, reach, pond, or link. So in most cases, you'll want to have that summary selected. We also have the options as to whether or not we want to show the notes within that particular summary or exclude those. We can also have private notes. So if you have notes which you are recording just for design purposes, just to show how you arrived at a value, but you don't necessarily want to include that in your presentation copy, then you can deselect this in order to omit the private notes. And we also can control messages which are will appear in the report. This includes your warning messages and both your hints and your warnings. Generally, you do want to have these appear because it is conveying important information about the analysis, but you could deselect this option if you prefer not to have those messages appear in the report. The next item here is for wizards, and this pertains at the moment to the underground storage wizard, which is used for modeling underground storage chambers. And if you select this item, then a separate page appears for the wizard with the full storage analysis. You can deselect this if you don't want that report to appear. And then, finally, we can choose the individual items that will appear for each of the nodes. And these are directly related to the tabs that we've looked at for the individual subcatchment and pond report. For example, we can select whether we want the hydrograph plot or whether we want to see that in a tabular format. Then we have the stage discharge report and the table with the same info. And then finally the stage storage plot and the tabular version of that report. So you can select whatever elements here you want to have appear in your particular report. Down the bottom, we've got a number of options that control the overall formatting of the report. We can select 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional charts. We can automatically shrink the tables, or you could deselect that if you don't want them shrunk. If you deselect this, be cautious because each of those tables may take 5, 10, even 30 pages to print. So your report is going to be much, much larger when you deselect that. And then we have the option to print in color, which is normally selected. And we can also control this first page number. So if we're going to print a report that's going to be assembled with other pages in front of it, then we can set the initial number that will be used for that first page. We have another option at the bottom here for an extra page heading. So if we want to indicate that this particular model is scenario A or post-development or some other annotation, then we can put this into the heading. Keep in mind the heading will automatically include the name of your project and the rainfall event, so that information is already covered. You will also often be using a separate project for existing and proposed, for pre and post, so the naming of the project will include that information in the heading. So this is really just for supplementary information in addition to those items that you may want to put in that heading. There's a little checkbox down the bottom here to save settings, and what that does is it causes the software to save all of the settings on this screen, so the next time we come back to the screen, the defaults will be the same settings that we used last time. If we uncheck that box, and I can do that just now, let me uncheck settings and cancel this screen, and then we'll come back to print report, and now the whole screen has reverted to the default settings. So that's how you would get it back to defaults. You just uncheck that box. Otherwise, with save settings selected, it will remember whatever settings you put in here. Now, to have a look at some examples of a multi-page report, we could just run this out to a printer, but often you want to preview that report, or perhaps you want to create an electronic version of the report to send to someone else. And this is where outputting to a PDF file comes in, and where this is a very powerful capability. Let's just use this default report that we have configured here and click the print button. Now, for multi-page reports, it will always ask you to confirm the printer that you want to use before it goes ahead and creates the report. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change my printer selection and select Adobe PDF. This option will be available to you on your computer if you've installed Adobe Acrobat. This is Acrobat Standard that I have installed here. This is not the Adobe Reader. The Acrobat Reader doesn't give you the ability to create PDF files or to print to a PDF file. You need to actually purchase the standard Acrobat in order to do that. But there are also a number of other programs on the market. There's shareware and freeware and inexpensive programs that will help you create PDF files. And they provide a PDF writer of various different types. I've also got a Bullzip PDF printer. There's Qt PDF writer. There are a bunch of others. And we do have a list of these available on our website. If you go to support page on HydroCAD.net, you'll find an article on printing and exporting tips, and that includes some discussion of different PDF drivers that you might want to use. So in this instance, I'm going to include or select Adobe PDF and click OK, and it now asks us where I want to store this particular report, and we can just click Save. And HydroCAD is now generating a report. You can see for each of our return periods, and it's output that entire report to a PDF file, which is what we have here. And so this gives us the capability to preview the exact report that might go out to our printer. And here we have an area listing. Let me enlarge this a little bit. There we go. Our soil group breakdown, land use. So in this manner, we can step through and look at the report as it would appear when we output it to our printer. So this is a great way to do a preview of your report before printing. It's also the way to go if you want to send an electronic report to someone else. Rather than printing the report and sticking it in the scanner, just print it directly to PDF. And this lets you run long reports without any great concern for how much space, for example, the tables might take. If we come back to this report screen, let's pick a couple of different options, and let's turn off the shrink option here. And what I want are the tables, and let's do print here, and still to Adobe PDF, and we'll replace that previous file. And so now if we step through here and come to our subcatchment table, you can see we have 1, 2, 3 pages needed for that table because we've turned off that shrink option. So a lot of nice things you can do with a PDF writer installed. It's definitely something you should be using on your system. It's very, very handy. Now, and of course the PDF writer also applies to printing individual reports from the screen when you click this print button. If you want to do that, then you need to come to printer settings, and you need to make sure your default printer for that session is set to Adobe PDF or whatever your print driver may be. Then when I click the print button, which goes straight to your printer, Acrobat does prompt me for a file name. We select that file, and it creates a one-page report, exactly as it might appear on your printer. The last category of items I want to talk about today are some other export settings that are available in HydroCAD. So far, we have looked at exporting the reports that you might normally view and sending those out to a graphical format or a spreadsheet file, a CSV file. And those reports or those options right here on this export button are handy if it's just an individual piece of information you want. For example, if we have this hydrograph and we want to export just that, we click the export button and pick a CSV file, and we can export that and load it into our spreadsheet. But we have to do this one node at a time, and we have to re-export this file when information changes. So it's not ideal when we want to export a larger volume of information. In order to do that, we can go to the Settings Export screen. And you note by the icon next to that item that we can also find Export over here on the right-hand toolbar if you're using HydroCAD 9.0 and 9.1. Either of those selections will take you to this export screen. If you have questions about this screen or any of the others, remember to use the Help button. The Help button is specific context-sensitive help about that specific screen that you're on right now. So you won't have to dig too far in order to get answers to your questions. And the individual topics on this screen are hyperlinked, so you can get more information about any one of these options. You can even read a discussion about CSV files and how they're created and used. So on this export settings screen, there are two general categories of items that can be exported here as indicated by these two boxes. The first group up top is to export hydrograph files, and specifically to export them in an HCE format. This is a HydroCAD external hydrograph file. And the intent or the reason for these files is to export a hydrograph into a format that can be easily imported by HydroCAD using a link. One of the most common applications where you would use these is actually to take a very large project that you might need to break into several sections and to link those sections together. And if you were doing that, then what you would be concerned with is taking the final hydrograph from the upper section of your model and importing that into the lower section of the model. And that can be handled by using this option to export the unrouted outflow hydrographs. So whichever one or more hydrographs just end and don't go anywhere in your upper model are probably the flows that you're going to import into the next project downstream. So selecting that option would automatically export those flows. This is probably not an option that you would use if you want to generate a report with that hydrograph, because it's generating a specialized HCE file which is intended primarily for use by HydroCAD with a link. It's what a link is able to import. And that HCE file can include multiple flows. It can have a primary and a secondary flow, and it can also have all of the different rainfall events that you've defined. Those are all automatically included in that HCE file. So it gives you a way to seamlessly link those projects together. And there's a detailed article on our website that talks about using a link and how you would configure the HCE files and your rainfall events in order to do that. So that's the intent of this box. It's not really for importing, which is the focus of our discussion, or exporting and reporting, which is the focus of our session today. The second box here has got the export options that you'd be more likely to use for reporting purposes. And the first of those options is to export the node tables to a CSV file. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create comma-separated values in a file that we can load into a spreadsheet. When I select one of these options, this help box or reminder box pops up to tell us that this exported information only becomes available after the project is closed. When we select an option on this export screen, these are automatically exported items, meaning that every time we open and then reclose this project file, HydroCAD will re-export this information. So it updates these tables to make sure they always contain the latest information corresponding to this project file. So this avoids the need to have to manually make the setting every time we go in, or manually click an export button. So the first option that we have here are node tables, and this is a separate table which is generated for each kind of node in the project. And then there are columns for each of the parameters for those nodes. And to have a look at that, let's just select that one option and click OK. And then what we need to do is we need to close out of this project. So we need to do a close, and we need to say, yes, we do want to save this project. And I've actually got a second project open here. Let's close out of that project. Now, when we closed and saved, actually let me do that one more time because I don't think it did what I was looking for. Let's go to Settings, Export, and we do have Node Table selected. Click OK, and then we do need to do a project close is what I'm looking for, and then you hear it updated the calculations in order to do that export. And now what we have to do is we have to go in and actually find the file that was exported, which will take me just a minute. But what it will do is it'll create a separate file for each type of node, for the subcatchments, reaches, and ponds. And those files will each contain a table for that particular kind of node, and there'll be columns in there that will show you how that data is structured. Let me see if I can find that for you here just quickly. Let's see. We have to find the particular project in which, or a particular folder in which that project was stored. So usually for HydroCAD, if you go into C, Program Files, and then go to HydroCAD and Projects, and come down to the project name, which was Mountain View Housing Complex. There we go. And in addition to the original project file, you can see here we have a bunch of CSV files that were created. We have one for subcatchments, reaches, ponds, and links. And if we open the subcatchment one, and this is going to launch our spreadsheet once again, and expand the heading line a little bit, now you can see the columns that have been created. So we have the node type, number, the name, the notes, and essentially all of the parameters that appear in HydroCAD for that particular subcatchment are shown in a tabular format, including our curve numbers and areas. So this is a great way to get essentially all of the information out of HydroCAD that it has about a particular model. And these tables are in a fixed format for consistency, but you could use these with dynamic links in your spreadsheet in order to bring information into a custom report that you might create. You could also bring these into a database and manage the information there. So there's quite a number of options that are available to you. This is basically just a way to automatically get that information out of HydroCAD, so it's available for you to use. So that's all of the material we had planned to cover today. If you do want more detail on any of these topics, then I would urge you to go to our support page at hydrocad.net, and you will find an article there on exporting data from HydroCAD, which covers all of the options I've touched on today. There's also a separate article there on printing and printing tips, and that's got a discussion of this whole range of options. One thing I skipped over, if you want to export your information to, or export a report to MS Word for editing, One of your options is to export to PDF, and then in Acrobat, use File, Save As, MS Word. So you can use that option. The formatting is not always completely preserved, but that's the best way to get the information over there. Again, using a PDF file is a great tool. It gives you a lot of flexibility at moving things around. So I thank you for joining us today. That's our session. This program will be recorded and posted on our website on the webinars page. So if you or someone else is interested in looking at the content, it will be available there. And certainly I encourage you to revisit that page and look at future webinars that we have scheduled, and hopefully we'll see you at a future session. Thank you very much. Have a great day.